This is Rabbi Yehuda Levin, August 25th, 2011, L'Misparim. First, several years ago, there was that ravishing tsunami that taught us all the term tsunami, and many people didn't pay any attention. Then there were the tragic earthquakes in Haiti, where so many tens of thousands died. Very few paid attention, and even fewer noticed that Haiti was attached to the Dominican Republic on one island, and while Haiti was ravaged, and in many previous situations, Haiti suffered far, far more than the Dominican Republic. And the difference in statistics with practices of homosexuality and per capita AIDS statistics were conveniently ignored. Then there was the tsunami in Japan, the many hurricanes, and other natural disasters, droughts, hurricanes, floods, all in one country, and people ignored. And then earlier today, we had the earthquake that went across the eastern seaboard, the Carolinas, Georgia, all the way up to Canada, New Hampshire, New York. Cracks in the Washington Monument, broken spires on the National Cathedral, and still many people scoff and ignore. An email went out in my community just a few hours ago. How long will it take Rabbi Yehuda Levin to tie this earthquake in with homosexual marriage? I'd like to answer that tonight. Not very long at all. I'm happy to see that people, even if some of them are scoffers, are starting to see the connection. Yes, there is a connection. And first, let's talk about history. In the Bible, it tells us about the flood of Noah. It also teaches us in our Medrash that goes back the better part of 1500 to 2000 years. The Medrash teaches us that the flood of Noah did not come. The final straw came about, causing the flood when men started to write marriage contracts to fellow man and to animals, Sades of Equus. We have something to look forward to. Then a little further in Genesis, we find the story of Sodom, where when the Sodomites, the citizens of Sodom, surrounded Lot's house and demanded that strangers come out so that they may, quote unquote, get to know them. In other words, to sodomize them. Hence, we use the word sodomy and sodomizing until this very day, even though the homosexual community, the militants, are trying very hard to take the word sodomy or sodomizing out of the legal terminology. They don't like that because it reminds us of the biblical story. I understand their problems with that. I appreciate that. I respect them. I have tolerance for their problem with that. But when we go a little further, we find out that our rabbis teach us that the whole night the family of Lot was praying that Sodom be spared. But once they wanted to sodomize his guests, who were really heavenly angels, then they were told, that's it. The fate of Sodom has been sealed. And forevermore, we remember the fate of Sodom, which is by the Dead Sea. We remember that fate by referring to this act of sodomy. A little later in the Bible, we find that God's eternal, intergenerational, so to speak, adversary is Amalek. And Amalek, it's referred to in the Hebrew term, Asher korcha baderech, that they happened to cross you on the way, when you were on the way out of Egypt in the desert. And the rabbis tell us then, also going back 2,000-year-old tradition, first they got the Jews out of the cloud of protection. They got them, they tricked them into coming out. Then they sodomized them. Then they murdered them. Then they cut off their member and hurled it at God. They dismembered them, cutting off their circumcised member and saying, God, you want holiness, you want self-control and reproduction here. They flaunted God. They mocked God. In Leviticus 26, verses 23 and 24, I will read to you. It says, if despite these, all the previous punishments, you will not be chastised towards me, and you have behaved casually with me, then I, God, too, will behave towards you with casualness, and I will strike you, even though I 7 ways for your sins. I will bring upon you a sword avenging the vengeance of a covenant. You will be gathered into your cities. Then I will send a pestilence among you, and you will be delivered into the hands of your enemies. Now, in the Art Scroll Chumash, the Art Scroll, 5 Books of Moses in the English translation, in the commentary, it quotes as follows. I too will act with casualness. Says God, if you persist in thinking that all of my carefully calibrated punishments were merely coincidental, calibrated step by step, more severe, so that my message is wasted because you keep on saying, and I don't use the word casualness, I use the word happenstance, I will punish you measure for measure by making it more difficult for you to perceive the divine hand. In other words, the more you deny the hand of God, measure for measure, the more God aids you in that, and it will seem like coincidence to you, so that you will get punished with even worse on the hierarchy. The next series of punishments will seem haphazard, for their correspondence to your sins will not be as obvious as in the case of the earlier punishment. This is the commentary of the Ohr HaChaim. This follows the principle that if people refuse to quote unquote see God, meaning to perceive him, he withdraws his presence, hiddenness of his countenance, and makes it harder for them to recognize the truth. We saw today an earthquake. The Jerusalem Talmud, which is also around 1600 years old, and verbally it goes back in terms of a tradition far more than that. The Jerusalem Talmud tells us that one of the reasons that God brings earthquakes to the world is because of the transgression of homosexuality. And the Talmud states, you have shaken your male member in a place where it does not belong. I too will shake the earth. So to those who sent out the email, yes, there's a direct connection between earthquakes and homosexuality. There was in Haiti, and there is here in New York, in Washington, D.C., where they passed homosexual legislation and ordinances, in New York City and state, where they opened, especially on Sunday early, after they passed the homosexual marriage bill. They couldn't wait until the regular Monday, but all the county clerks had to open early to service the homosexual couples who wanted to get married. We don't hate homosexuals. As a matter of fact, anyone who sees the comments to these YouTubes of mine will see who's manifesting the hate. Nobody can show that I've ever advocated violence or hate or outrage. On the contrary, I feel bad for homosexuals or heterosexuals who have different drives for underage children or for adultery. And I say, there, for the grace of God, go me. Until such a point as you make it an issue of pride and marching, and you force it down our throats through legislation and force our children to learn it like they're doing in schools in California, soon to come to New York. At that point, we truly have to stand up and say it like it is. In New York this past Sunday, there was a topless protest in Columbus Circle. Hundreds of women to go topless. Today, this very day, on the day of the earthquake, saw a David Weprin, a so self-professed, self-described modern Orthodox Jew who stood up in the New York State Assembly shortly before the Holy Sabbath and said, I'm Orthodox, my children are Orthodox, I go to Orthodox yeshivas, I was married Orthodox, they were married Orthodox, and I, as an Orthodox Jew, support homosexual marriage because it's not a religious issue, it's an issue of civil rights. A moral wrong, David, can't be a civil right, and this is very much a religious issue. How dare you defame orthodoxy? Just this very evening, on the eve of August the 25th, after the earthquake, if it wasn't canceled, the Stonewall Inn was hosting a fundraiser. Stonewall Inn, in the heart of homosexual militancy in Lower Manhattan, was hosting a fundraiser for David Weprin. We wish to say shame on you, David Weprin. We wish to disassociate ourselves from this kind of anti-Jewish Judaism, so-called, and we want everyone to understand that if these kinds of activities and continue and are legislated into the moral fiber of the country and it's forced down the throats of the religious people, it's a revolt against God, and literally there's hell to pay. Let's wise up and let's get back to standards and values and stop being babies and call those of us who yield to biblical values haters. You're the ones who froth at the mouth. You're the ones who curse. All we say is, let us live our religious values, time-honored values of millennia in peace. And let us take heed and understand the messages that God is sending us. Let us not look at this as happenstance.